Today I'm helping you write a one-shot. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether it's your first one-shot or your 15th, I'm here to help you with everything. Of course, before we get to the main dish of one-shots, you have to endure the appetizers of me self-promoting myself. As always, thank you for watching me. I hope you learned something out of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, click the damn subscribe button down below. Click the little notification bell. That's the only way that you and I can defeat the YouTube algorithm, because let's be honest, I'm not yet the kind of guy that pops up on the front page of the YouTube. So help me get there. Subscribe. Thank you, and I shall now immediately stop self-promoting. And now we do get to that wonderful main dish of today, one-shot. So yes, I'm going to talk about one-shots. For those who don't know, one-shots are a self-contained adventure that you kind of run in one session. Instead of having a campaign that stretches across many sessions, months, years, quite possibly, a one-shot has a shorter adventure that will be completely played in one session, and then you're done. Coolio. Now, usually when I write a one-shot, I'm aiming at about 3 hours of time. Some are a bit shorter, some are a bit longer, but like 3 hours is my guideline that I write for. Why would you run a one-shot? Well, time constraints being one thing, obviously. It's a lot easier to gather a group of people on an just for one adventure than it is to start a campaign and keep it going for 2 years. That doesn't mean that your one-shots have to be separate stories all the time. They can be interconnected, which is what I like to do now and then. But it keeps a more looser atmosphere for people with a lot of planning issues, right? Of course, they're also really good to test out a group. Like, are these people that I would want to get into a campaign with? Let's have a one-shot and see. They're also excellent to test out your own dungeon master skills. If you're unsure whether you would like to dungeon master or not, run a one-shot instead of promising people to run the entirety of Mines of Phandelver and having to give up halfway through because you don't like it. Run 1 or 2 one-shots, see where that gets you. If you like it, you can continue with something else. Now, if I tell to you that a one-shot my one-shots usually take up to 3 hours, that means I have to be very concise in what I want to do. That means we don't have the time to lollygag around in every inn, in every city or village. We cannot harass every peasant or policeman that we encounter. You have to be really concise. So I think the good way to start writing a one-shot is to pick your theme first. What are you going to write about? What is your story going to be about? This can be something very simple. You know, I'm running some level 3 clear out the bandit den thing, or I'm going to play at a very high level one-shot and have my characters interact with the gods, and they'll have to attend a fancy celestial banquet and see how they behave themselves. So you pick something and you stick your focus, you stay focused on that. Don't sidetrack, don't start divulging pages and pages of lore. It's a one-shot, you only have that much time, and believe me, whatever you think is going to be too little of prep will be more than enough for the average player group, if you're anything like me. In a one-shot, I have 2 to 3 encounters maximum, and 3 is usually when it's very combat focused. That doesn't mean that encounters have to be combat. Those 2 or 3 can also be lengthy exploration sections or very expansive social interactions, like a banquet with divinities would surely take longer than 2 dice rolls. Hence, this would take up an encounter slot in your one shot. 3 is really the maximum. I think if you have 4 encounters, you're not going to have enough time. Again, looking at the 3 hour window that I'm referring to. If you're running for 5 hours, sure, 4 or 5 encounters might even work. An encounter an hour tends to work. Another important thing, yes, only include relevant locations, and that also means cutting your introductions a bit short. In a normal campaign, your characters might have the chance of refusing a mission. You know, they arrive in a village and they're asked to kill the local bandits, but they don't want to do it because they're on a very important secretive mission for the king, and they only have so many days to complete it, and hunting the bandits might endanger the mission. This is not the case in a one-shot. Don't offer them the mission. Start the story with, you've accepted this mission, blah, 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 blah. And then you can already cut out like half an hour of chatter between the party and the local mayor of Hubblebub. Why? Because I've noticed, both in my own one-shots and in other people's one-shots, that if you do include stuff like that, you give them the opportunity to interact with the quest giver and what have you, while it's not really relevant to your greater narrative for that evening. It is going to eat up a lot of time. They are going to want to ask questions. They might want to talk to other people that know something about it. And that's a logical reflex to have as a player, because that's what you do in a normal campaign. But since a one-shot is not a normal campaign and you work in a shorter time frame, you also have to eliminate some of the thingies. So only include relevant locations. If the party has to go to the island of undead dragons, so have them start like on the last mile on the boat before the island, so they can maybe, I don't know, if you have a cleric that wants to cast AIDS before the shit hits the fan, they have the opportunity. But don't have them start in the mayor's hall in the harbor town of Portside for a nice chat, because they'll stay there, they'll interrogate everyone, they want to spend 2 nights at the inn, they want to bar brawl and dice fight and what have you, and your one shot is already running late. So focus on the relevant locations. Basically start close to the first relevant location. In that regard, you might want to give the party a bit more information than you usually would. So that they don't have to ask those 15,000 questions to every NPC they encounter. Give them a bit more information maybe than you might do in certain campaigns. Now, that doesn't mean that the party doesn't get any free will in this. It's not like you're writing a book and they're just hovering along and they might succeed or not. No, the party should still have free reign on how they approach the business at hand. Whatever the topic is that you've presented them with, the theme for the night, the mission, the assignment, the undertaking, what have you, they should have free reign on how they handle that. They should not have free reign in how long they take to approach the core business of the evening. If you've planned 3 encounters and the party's still chatting up the bar maidens, well, that's not what we want. And you might think, yeah, so that means that one-shots are always going to be a bit railroady. And that might be true. So one-shots are going to be more railroady than open sessions in a campaign usually, but that doesn't mean you cannot have sandbox one-shots. But they need to happen in a very defined, enclosed location. For example, a prison break could be a very nice sandbox one-shot. They're in the prison, so they're limited in their movement, their freedom, but how they get out of the prison is completely up to them. Me, myself, I have a infamous one-shot that takes place in a small pocket dimension on like a northwestern American farm. You know, the one with the big the bright red sheds. If I'm misorienting these farms, don't shoot me, American viewers. Please just educate me where I find these. But you know the type of farm that I'm talking about. And since it's in a pocket dimension, that's all they can do. They can only be on the farm. If they try to leave the farm, they loop back on the farm. But within this farm, where a lot of things are happening, they have complete free reign on how to approach things, what they do, when they want to do it. So that's a nice example of a sandbox one-shot. I'm not guiding them on doing something. There's a few goals they have to achieve, like 1 actually, but you know, blah blah. And they have to discover and explore and interact. There might be combat involved, and they can do whatever they want, but within the confines of the farm. So that is a sandbox one-shot. Most one-shots will be a bit more segmented, railroady, but still, again, and I cannot stress how important it is, the party should have free reign on how they approach their business. Yes, combat in one-shots is also a bit special. And that is in regards to the difficulty of the different fights. Seeing as one-shot will usually imply that the party starts with all of their resources, that means that if you're not playing at level 1 and your party does not consist of like completely new players, you can make combat a bit more difficult than you would usually do in a campaign. Because at the start of every one-shot, the wizard is going to have all of their spell slots available to them, so they will have a lot of gunpowder to shoot around during 2 or 3 encounters, instead of maybe 6 or 7 during the course of a normal long rest. Heck, your one-shot might even have long rests included in them because of this. I have a very simple, it's a level 1 shot is an escort quest. You have to escort an NPC from town A to B, the usual stuff, but that means there's a lot of long rests involved, because basically every day they sleep. So that means that the combat, even though they're level 1, can be a tiny little bit spicier than it usually would. Again, they're still level 1, so keep your reins closed in your hands there, but you get the idea. Now, to counter this, another thing is that you could have them start a particular one-shot with not having all of their resources at their disposal. Maybe they start mid-adventure. You've skipped the introduction entirely. The original quest line has gone terribly wrong, and now they have to fix it as well as they can, but they've already fought a few times, so I don't know, the casters have lost half their spell slots, the Battlemaster fighter only has half their superiority dies, stuff like that. What is really cool about those one-shots is that they can usually allow the short rest characters to shine a bit more, because I've noticed that one-shots, they might have a long rest, but they don't have a lot of short rest usually, which is too sad for those classes like the Warlock, the Fighter, some Druids, a little bit the Wizard, everybody who gets to do stuff after a short rest. The Monk, for example, they can rarely be played to their full benefit, because they don't get to burst and then short rest and burst again. So a one shot like this could be really fun, where they only start with half their resources, but halfway through they can take a short rest, and then all of those short rest characters are basically back to their full potentials, while the casters, the wizard, who is usually very powerful because of all of their spell slots that can be spent in only the course of 3 hours, they will still be limping behind, because they've spent a few more spell slots and they already had lost half of them at the start, and they might be running out of fuel for once, which is good. It's a very different feeling that you create. You create a feeling of dread, a necessity for rest, which is good. You want your players to not feel like they are invincible because it's a one-shot with all the resources all the time. So taking away a bunch of their resources works just fine. And that's actually most of the tips I wanted to give you. Now you might wonder, Sam, it's a short session, 3 hours, it's one story, how can I get my players into it? Small tip that I can give you, something that I like to do from time to time, I write to players a letter. It can be handwritten, it can be typed, it depends on how much time and effort I want to put into it, but it's something personal. I can write a letter to each of the party members if they have separate missions. For example, I ran one shot in the Ravnica setting, which is a Magic the Gathering setting where you live, the world is a city and there's 10 guilds present basically. Each party member came from a different guild, so they had different orders relating to the same mission they were undertaking, which was fun, caused some player interaction later on as well, whoopsie doopsie. But they were, I think it helped them get into the story more immediately. They knew what they had to do. They came prepared as well, even though they just arrived at the table. I gave them something to get into the story. I gave them a plot hook. And that's just the same as with a campaign. You want to provide plot hooks. There's also been cases, though that was in the One Ring, not Dungeons and Dragons, where I wrote a letter from their patron. So in the One Ring, your characters have a patron who kind of helps them get missions and stuff. And I wrote a letter from their patron detailing their mission, handwritten, yellowy paper, the ink thing, the entire shebang. So that was nice and is a way to pull them into the story as well. So little things like that can pull your party into the story from the get-go. Maybe I should do an episode on making your table come alive, and like drawing your players in, how you do that. Sure, let's do that next time. For now, that's it. I've talked about one-shots. I've given you some tips on how you keep your one-shot within the time frame that you are eyeing at, and hopefully that helps you somewhat. And I will see you again in 2 weeks in the Attic Dungeon.